So welcome everybody to the seminar today. Tanay Kibe, who is our student at IIT Madras, he would be presenting something on his upcoming paper about quantum thermodynamics of holographic quenches. And so over to you, Tanay.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to be talking about a paper that is going to come out in the next few days, hopefully. So I'll be talking about quantum thermodynamics of holographic quenches, and I'll show how the QNEC will place bounds on entanglement growth. So this is based on work with Avik, Nehal, Ayan, and Pratik, and also with Marius, but that's some upcoming work. Change slides. Yeah, okay. So this is how I've structured my talk. So I'll start by just a quick introduction to what is QNEC and a very short introduction to quantum thermodynamics. Then I'll describe our methodology, how we compute entanglement entropy and QNEC in our setup. I'll come to then describing our results, and I'll finally conclude with some description of future work and some speculative questions. Okay, so let me start with the broader introduction. So it's pretty obvious now that there is a very deep connection between gravity, thermodynamics, and quantum information. So the first time this was seen was just the Bekenstein-Hawking entropy, which related the entropy of the black hole to the area of its horizon, and also the laws of black hole thermodynamics. But more recently, ideas from quantum information, such as error correction, are being used more and more to understand bulk reconstruction and many other ideas in EDS-CFT. So, for instance, in bulk reconstruction, quantum information tells us that a subregion of the bulk is encoded as a quantum error correcting code in the subregion of a boundary. So many such ideas are now being imported into the high energy literature to make sense of ADS-CFT. So then this is something which many of us know. The ADS-CFT dictionary relates various quantities in the QFT on the boundary to some geometric objects in the space-time in one higher dimension. So what we are interested in primarily in this work is the entanglement entropy of some subregion in the QFT, and this is related to the area of an extremal surface on the bulk. Now this is the well-known Ryu-Takanagi formula, which was generalized to time-dependent spacetimes by Hubeni and others. So this is illustrated in this picture here. So this is a time slice of a cylinder. So you have a CFT on the boundary. I want to consider the entanglement entropy of a subregion R, which is the thing to the left on the boundary. And that is computed by computing the extremal surface, which in this case is just a geodesic, which is the green curve in the picture, gamma of R. And the Ryu-Takanagi formula tells us that the entanglement entropy of R is just this first term here, which is area by 4gh bar, where the area in R in this case is just the length of the geodesic. But now this is correct only to order 1 by h bar in the bulk Planck constant. So if you have bulk quantum fields, this needs to be corrected with some additional term, which I write as S entanglement bulk. Now this thing put together is what is called the generalized entropy. So now the proposal is, if you want to compute the entanglement entropy of the subregion R, you have to find a surface gamma of R that extremizes this generalized entropy. The first term is what we know is just area. The second term is the entanglement entropy in the bulk. So you trace out all the bulk quantum fields in the subregion to the right of the green curve in the bulk, and then you compute the entanglement entropy of the resultant reduced density matrix in the bulk. So that's the S entanglement bulk. Now this particular thing, this proposal is believed to be correct to all orders in the bulk Planck constant, but not all orders in the Newton constant. So now coming to one thing which we'll need, which is the QNEC. So this is before I come to the QNEC, let me state something which is already well known, which is the classical focusing theorem in GR. So this just states that that light rays don't anti-focus. So matter can't make light rays deviate apart, as long as certain conditions on the matter energy momentum tensor hold. So this is a picture from Eric Poisson's book on GR, where he shows an example of anti-focusing of two rays. You can see them deviating away. Now this is essentially just the statement that gravity is attractive. So as I mentioned, the focusing theorem is a consequence of certain conditions on the stress tensor. One example of that is the null energy condition. So as long as neck holds, the classical focusing theorem is true. So now here T mu is just the energy momentum tensor. The K is the future directed null vector. And this just says that this projection of T on this K is positive. But now the classical focusing theorem can fail at the semi-classical level, because neck can be violated if you have some quantum fields in the bulk. So this T mu can have negative expectation values at certain points, and that would lead to a violation of the neck. So for instance, if you are near black hole horizons, or if you have Hawking radiation, it's known that the classical neck is violated, and therefore the classical focusing theorem can fail. So a quantum generalization of this focusing is needed, and that is the so-called quantum focusing conjecture. So this was proposed by Buoso and others in this paper here. So what you do is you define something called a quantum expansion, which is this capital theta here, which is just the variation of the generalized entropy, which I defined in my first slide, with respect to delta x. So I'll define what each of these objects mean now. So if you look at this picture here again, I've drawn this little red deformation. So you compute the generalized entropy of this geodesic, or this extremal surface gamma r, which would give you the entanglement entropy of the boundary subregion R. But now you want to deform this extremal surface gamma R at some particular point by some small amount dx or delta x. Now the A which appears here is just the area of the deformation. So that's the area, or in this case, the length of the region which lies between the endpoints of the red region. So the green curve which is between the ends of the red region. So this is how the classical expansion is defined, and this is a natural generalization. Sorry, this is how the quantum expansion is defined. This is a natural generalization from the classical expansion, where the S-gen would just have the Ryu-Takenagi entropy. So the S, instead of S-gen, if you just have the area term, you recover the classical expansion. The classical focusing theorem states that the variation of the classical expansion is negative, or is non-positive. Similarly, the quantum focusing conjecture states that the variation of the quantum expansion is non-positive, which is this second equation here.
Released or activated when you go.
Okay. Was there a question?
No, I think not.
Yeah. Okay. So then, if you impose the quantum focusing conjecture, you get the what is called the quantum null energy condition, or the QNEC, which is just stated in this inequality. So on the left hand side, you again have the expectation value of the energy momentum tensor projected along some future directed null vector k. Now this states that the second variation of the entanglement entropy places a lower bound on the expectation value of the energy momentum tensor. The classical neck was just with the right hand side 0. But in this case, the second variation can be both positive and negative. So in one case, the Q neck would be a stronger statement than the classical neck, and in the other case, it would be a weaker statement. Now, this has been proved in two-dimensional CFTs just by field theory computation, and also in holographic CFTs separately. These are two places where it's proved.
But also in free field theories generally, I think. In free field theories also it is proven.
Yeah.
By Wall, I think, Aaron Wall.
Yeah, I haven't cited it. I should have. So, but in two-dimensional CFTs, this QNEC takes a slightly different form, which is this yellow equation here. I've moved the things on the right to the left and stated this as a positivity condition. So I define something called this fancy Q plus minus, which are this expectation of the energy momentum minus the variations of the entanglement entropy. So now it has the S double prime term, which was there in higher dimensions too, but it has this additional term, which is 6 by C times S prime squared. Now, since this is positive definite, C is positive, S prime square is positive. In two dimensions, the QNEC is a stronger constraint than in higher dimensions. Now,
You haven't defined what is C, right, yet. It's not the speed of light here, right?
oh, no, it's just the central charge of the CFT. I thought that would be. Yeah, so this is what I defined to be Q plus minus, which I'll just call either QNEC plus or QNEC minus in the top. So now to what is S double prime, what is S prime, what is T plus minus, and so on. So to explain that, I just draw this figure, which is just the boundary CFT. You have the time direction, which is the y-axis, space is the x-axis. So let's say you consider some boundary subregion, which is this red region on the curve, the solid red region. I deform one end of the red region along the light cone denoted by dx plus. I deform it by a small amount dx plus. So if I say t plus plus, I mean the projection of t along this particular light cone direction. T minus minus is its projection along the opposite one, along the other one. Now S double prime, S prime are variations of the entanglement entropy with respect to this small null deformation of one endpoint of the boundary region. That's what I've compressed into this notation.
Yeah, but this endpoint is actually the point of observation, right? This is where you're.
Yes. So yeah.
Where you are measuring the expectation value
yes.
of t.
So yeah, the expectation of t mu is of course local. So that's evaluated that's measured at the point where the deformation is performed. So this is something we'll use, the QNEC in two-dimensional CFTs. So that was my introduction to QNEC. Now another concept which we'll touch upon, or which will make actually a concrete connection to, is quantum thermodynamics. So now
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
A basic question. So these null energy conditions are kind of motivated to make sure that this focusing theorem holds, right?
Okay, yeah.
For the focusing theorems to hold, we have these null energy conditions. So what if the focusing theorems don't hold? Like what? One way is that, does that always imply that the gravity, that focusing theorem does always imply that the gravity is attractive?
Yeah.
Could it be that focusing theorem does not hold and yet the gravity is attractive? Like,
no, the focusing theorem not holding would imply that if there is some matter which would allow the light rays to not focus. So
well, I think the point is that here you're treating gravity semi-classically, right, with quantum matter. So you expect some kind of focusing to work, but the main point is that I guess you don't, I mean, you simply here say there should be a second law of so the Bekenstein originally motivated the Bekenstein-Hawking formula just from statistical mechanics, that there should be a second law will be protected, right? If you throw something into a black hole, then you lose entropy in the rest of the universe, but the area of the event horizon increases. So so that is how you say it. So then you say that the natural generation of this entropy, of the classical entropy, would be to include the quantum entanglement entropy of matter outside the null shell, right? That's a natural, because you are treating gravity still classically. Matter is completely treated as purely quantum to all others in H bar. So then this rather motivates this thing. So this is a natural generation. So basically you say that you should be protecting second law, and that's how this quantum focusing conjecture comes about.
Yeah. So if you just demand that the generalized entropy should always increase in time, just roughly speaking, then that would also lead to the QNEC or the focusing.
Yeah, but I don't think it has, I mean, may or may not have this kind of a derivation like you have, or it comes from Raychaudhuri equation. It's simply a proposed generalization problem.
He states that it's a sufficient condition the generalized second law is a sufficient condition for the QNEC, or the other way around. No, if the generalized second
No,
law
no,
holds,
I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying that this generalized second law is simply a postulate of its own. It's not rather,
yeah, that's
so
true.
it's not
Yeah.
derived from
Yeah.
it from Raychaudhuri equations themselves. So it's simply a
Hmm.
proposed generalization.
Yeah.
That was just kind of an analogy of
Yeah.
classical, not
Yeah.
directly related.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So yeah, I was describing quantum thermodynamics. So in classical thermodynamics, we have these quantities, work, heat, and so on. So quantum thermodynamics describes how you can carry over such concepts to finite dimensional quantum systems. So you need not have like a large number of copies of the state or anything like that. If you just have one copy of the state, you can, there's still a way to carry over these concepts to such quantum systems. So one nice result from here is that quantum entanglement can lead to some anomalous heat flows. So Winter has shown it theoretically, and there were some experiments which have also established this. If there exists quantum entanglement between, let's say, a hot body and a cold body, that can allow you to transfer heat from a cold body to the hot body by using the entanglement. So it has some nice applications. There are of course more concrete things, such as what is called the one-shot work cost of creating a state. So by one shot, again, I mean you don't have a large number of copies of the quantum state. You just have one state. You can do some operation and create another state. You can't have multiple copies and do it statistically. So then what is shown is the one-shot work cost of creating a state, let's say a non-thermal state from a thermal state, and also the work you can extract from a state. That has been shown to be bounded by a relative entropy, which is called the hypothesis testing relative entropy in the quantum information literature. Now, this was shown by Nicole Halpern and others. So the hypothesis testing relative entropy it comes up in the context of hypothesis testing, where let's say you want to distinguish between two hypotheses. Let's say you have a state ρ1 and another state ρ2. You want to check which of these is the state you have. So given some state sigma, you can do measurements on that state to determine if it's closer to ρ1 or closer to ρ2. So this particular relative entropy comes up in that context. But there are many other relative entropies which have come up in the context of quantum thermodynamics, which are used to generate such bounds. And this field has, sorry.
Yeah, maybe just a comment here. So here, relative entropy would be like essentially from the Gibbs ensemble, we are creating something non-trivial, some state, and this relative entropy between them that is
between
here.
Let's say some thermal state and a non-thermal state.
And this and here also there is some epsilon approximation that is used, and so basically you always say you're creating this state with some epsilon approximation, and that is already included here. And similarly, when you extract work from a state, you have a battery that goes to an excited state, and that also is achieved within some epsilon approximation. So it's a very nice generalization, which takes into account also the approximations to which approximations you're creating the state and things like that.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, Ketan.
Yeah. So when you say this quantum, when two bodies have this quantum entanglement, and heat can flow from cold to hot, or cold to hot.
Yeah.
So that would mean that in quantum thermodynamics, you can have perpetual motion kind of thing also.
No, not really. So why you can flow from cold to hot, because you also have to account for the entanglement entropy. So it's not like the second law of thermodynamics is violated or something. So if you have to account for both the thermodynamic entropy as well as the entanglement entropy. So what's leading to this anomalous heat flow is the fact that these two bodies are entangled. So it's not a violation of the second law. It's just that you also have to account for entanglement. So it won't really lead to perpetual motion machines or anything.
So just to continue on that thread, Tanay, so it will then come from the fact that entanglement can decrease with time, right? In a sense,
Yes.
between two systems.
Yeah, it's a possibility indeed. Yeah, that's leads to such
Mhm.
things.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now this has seen.
So does this anomalous heat flow requires existence of conserved quantities apart from energy?
No, I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. I haven't gone through like Winter's paper recently. Yeah, so this has a large number of applications. Just to state a few, it's been used to limit rates of some chemical reaction. So Nicole Halpern co-wrote a paper with a chemist where they use such ideas to actually limit the rates of some interesting chemical reaction. You can also imagine constructing quantum engines where you have some cyclic process and there is some net outflow of work. So all of this is covered in this nice review by these two authors, if you're interested. So I mentioned the hypothesis testing relative entropy just to relate it to QNEC also, because QNEC is now known to be related to a second variation of the relative entropy. So what you do is this S is just the relative entropy between two states, rho plus delta rho and omega plus delta omega, where omega is the vacuum, rho can be any state you like. These deltas in our context would correspond to the changes in the state because of some null variation on the boundary. So let's say lambda is the deformation parameter along the null direction. So you deform both the vacuum state and the state you're interested in rho by along some null direction by some amount lambda. And this is the second variation of the relative entropy between these two states. So people have also proposed more generalized versions of the QNEC, which are constructed from more complicated quantum information quantities, such as these such as the sandwich Renyi divergence. So this was in a paper by Pratik and others. But now, if you just look at this inequality, it's a second variation of a relative entropy. That's all it is. So a first variation of the relative entropy is already known to quantum information people. That's what they refer to as the data processing inequality. But such a form of the second variation of the relative entropy is not known. There is something analogous which is called the Fisher information, but it is not the QNEC at all. So it is quite likely that the QNEC says something more than what is already known in the quantum information literature. I'll come to how this is interesting at the very end of my talk when I discuss my results. So now that I've set up some introduction, let me motivate what we are doing and already state some of our results to keep you interested. So what we are trying to do is to better understand how quantum thermodynamics can apply to many body systems. So to do that, we do some concrete experiments. I mean theoretical experiments. We study if QNEC places stronger restrictions on holographic quenches than those simply provided by classical thermodynamics. So does QNEC say something more than just the fact that the entropy has to increase and the temperature has to increase? Can QNEC say something more? So to do that, we consider transitions between rotating thermal states. The transitions are governed by quenches, which are some instantaneous momentum and energy injection from some very large memoryless bath. So there's some instantaneous injection of energy momentum at t equal to 0, let's say, and that governs a transition from one thermal rotating state to another. What we find is that increase in both temperature and entropy is necessary, of course, but it's not sufficient to not violate QNEC. So QNEC does indeed place stronger constraints than those from just classical thermodynamics. We also find that QNEC bounds the growth of entanglement entropy after such quenches. And we have results which generalize earlier work surrounding the same, which had established bounds on the entanglement group. Okay, so let me come to our methodology. So how we plan to actually compute the entropy and the QNEC. So we start with geometries which are called Bagnado's geometries. And these are holographically dual to some quantum states that saturate the QNEC. And these were called quantum equilibrium states in this paper by Grumiller and others. So the metric for such geometries is just written down here in the very first equation on the page. So here it's a three-dimensional metric. R is the radial direction. R goes to infinity is the boundary of the state space-time. So where I've also used something called x plus and x minus, which are just the light cone coordinates in the boundary. So u plus y and u minus y are the light cone coordinates in the boundary, where u is the time on the boundary. And L plus and L minus can be any functions of x plus and x minus. So now if you do holographic renormalization, it tells us that the boundary stress tensor looks like this, the second equation on the page, where I've written it down in terms of the light cone coordinates. So T plus plus is essentially L plus and T minus minus is essentially L minus. So this just says that these two functions L plus and L minus, which appear in the metric, they are just the holomorphic and anti-holomorphic parts of the CFT energy momentum tensor. So this is the set of Banyardo's geometries and its dual stress tensor. What we will consider is the situation when the L plus and L minus are positive constants, which we denote by mu plus square and mu minus square. And these just correspond to rotating BTZ black holes in the bulk spacetime. And the dual in the CFT, these are just rotating thermal states or thermal states with some momentum. Now for these, you can easily compute the Hawking temperature and the thermodynamic entropy density. So the Hawking temperature is just the harmonic mean of these two mu's, which appear in the energy momentum tensor. And the thermodynamic entropy is just the sum of the two mu's with the C by 6 of course. Now these metrics, these particular Banyardo's geometries, they have this nice property that they can be transformed back to the vacuum, which is the m equal to j equal to 0 metric. Sorry, this is the vacuum corresponds to L plus equal to 0, L minus equal to 0. So these Banyardo's metrics can be transformed to the vacuum by just a diffeomorphism. So I want to map a Banyardo's geometry to just the Poincare patch, which is this metric here. So we denote the Poincare patch by the capital coordinates, where again the R or the capital R is the radial direction, capital R goes to infinity is the boundary, and capital U is the time on the boundary. So these diffeomorphisms are given by the white box, by the equations in the white box. So this is something we found out for the first time. People knew these diffeomorphisms in the Pfefferman-Graham gauge, but we've written them down for the first time in the Eddington-Finkelstein, which is far more useful for computations, both numerical and analytic. And I'll show how these particular diffeomorphisms are extremely powerful and help us compute entropy and QNEC. So now to describe these a bit, okay, let's just look at the capital R equation. So there you can see if you take small r goes to infinity, capital R also goes to infinity. So the diffeomorphism maps the boundary to the boundary of the Poincare. Now these geometries have a horizon given by the term in the bracket in the capital R equation vanishing. Now this horizon maps to the Poincare horizon corresponding to capital R equal to 0.
Well, Tanay, they have two horizons. This is only the outer one.
Yeah. So they have two horizons. This is just the outer horizon. Yeah. Now, if you look at the capital U equation and set small r goes to infinity there, the third term just drops out. So you just end up with capital U is half x plus x minus. Similarly, in the capital Y equation, you end up with capital Y is half x plus minus x minus. So what that shows is on the boundary, these diffeomorphisms just act as conformal transforms. So although these Banyardo's geometries are just related to the vacuum by a diffeomorphism, the diffeomorphism acts as a conformal transformation on the boundary.
but it doesn't change the boundary metric. It's still
The boundary
Equatorial.
metric is still flat.
That's clear from the Poincaré patch metric that was written down on top.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
where it goes to after diffeomorphism.
So now I haven't told you yet what the capital X's are. So the capital X's are determined by the second last equation on the page, which says that L plus is just minus half the Schwarzian derivative of capital X plus with respect to the argument, where the Schwarzian derivative is defined for you. So now this Schwarzian has a nice symmetry. The Schwarzian is symmetric under SL2R transformations. So if I do a Mobius transformation of capital X, so if capital X goes to, let me annotate. Okay. Yeah. So if capital X goes to AX plus B by CX plus D, where ED minus BC is set to 1, then these are just the set of SL2R transformations. So you have two equations here. Each equation has an SL2R symmetry. These two SL2Rs just correspond to the SL2R cross SL2R symmetry of the bulk metric. Okay. So now this equation is rather hard to solve. I mean, you have a third order highly nonlinear differential equation with some source L plus. So these are not trivial to solve. But there's a nice trick to do it. So instead of solving that third order differential equation, you solve this nice second order differential equation, which is called the Hill equation, which is essentially just the Schrodinger equation. So here you write psi double prime minus L times psi is 0, where L is the same as the energy momentum tensor components. Now let's say this has two solutions, psi 1 and psi 2, two independent solutions. I can construct an F, which is just psi 1 by psi 2. And it's easy to verify that the Schwarzian of this particular F will indeed equal minus 2 times L. So instead of solving the third order complicated nonlinear equation, I just have to solve this Hill equation, and then I get my X. And that defines the diffeomorphism. So now that we have described the Bagnados geometries, which are the quantum equilibrium states, we want to quench them. So to do the quench, we write down a more general metric, which is this first equation. It has the same form, if you notice, but I've just replaced the L plus L minuses with some new functions, M and J. But here M and J need not be chiral functions. They need not be functions of X plus or X minus. They can be any arbitrary functions you like. Now for this particular metric, we can write down a bulk energy momentum tensor with these non-vanishing components, where again P and Q are arbitrary functions of U and Y. And it can be shown that this particular energy momentum tensor is conserved and traceless in this background metric. So you have this metric and this energy momentum tensor which supports the metric. Now you can look at Einstein equations for this T mu nu and this metric. And these are satisfied provided these two constraints on the M and the J hold, where the Q appears as a source on the first equation and the P appears as a source on the second equation. Now you can again do holographic renormalization for this more general set of metrics, and that will tell you that the boundary energy momentum tensor is as given here. And this stress tensor obeys Ward identities which are given here. So the Q's and the P's appear as sources in the Ward identity. So now if there is no bulk matter, M takes the familiar form, which is L plus plus L minus, and J takes the familiar form, which is L plus minus L minus. So you just recover the Bagnados geometry. So when there is no bulk matter, this small q and the small p vanish. So you just have the usual Ward identities for the boundary, and you'll just recover this Bagnados metric back, where this is M, L plus plus L minus, and this is J.
Tanay?
Yeah.
Can you briefly explain to me the CFT picture corresponding to these quenched Barniados geometries?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So for this, I guess that's.
Maybe you will discuss.
Let me do it in like 2 slides.
Okay.
I'm going to discuss this in 2 slides. Yeah. So as I said, in the absence of matter, you just recover the Barniados geometries, which in the CFT are just some excitations on top of the vacuum as an example, but there are more complicated geometries which one can describe.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to distinguish between like when people study, such quench processes, local quenches in Vaidya-like spacetimes compared to.
This is rather similar, or it's exactly the same, but we have more general geometries. It's not just
Yeah,
vacuum
actually,
to-
the local quenches can also be covered
Mhm.
in this way of doing things. See, all that you need is some answers for the bulk matter that is there, and there should be some energy momentum injection that is happening. This P and Q is the energy momentum injection from the boundary, right? The Q is the momentum, the energy injection, and P is the momentum injection, and they appear in the word entities. So now you can have instantaneous quenches, or more localized quenches, or you can have whatever. So that depends on the form of Q and P that you put in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in some special case, it will go to this Vaidya-like spacetimes and.
It's a very general
Okay.
class of solutions.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So now coming to the Vaidya-like spacetimes, if we choose M to be of this form and J to be of this form, so what this says is for U less than 0, M is L plus plus L minus. For U greater than 0, M is L bar plus plus L bar minus. So for U less than 0, you have one particular Barniados geometry. For U greater than 0, you have a different one. Similarly, the J would have a similar structure. Now, if you plug this into the constraints from Einstein equation, you'll see that the Q and P are proportional to delta functions. And these Q and P appear in the bulk energy momentum tensor. So this particular structure or this particular geometry would correspond to a shock wave traveling in the bulk along this particular null surface, which is U equal to 0. And these quenched or these quenched spacetimes are dual to a quench state in the CFT, where the quench is governed by some instantaneous inflow of energy and momentum. Instantaneous if you have these kind of Q's and P's, because it just happens at U equal to 0. But it can be more general. Q need not be a delta function.
Yeah, but still it is inhomogeneous. Although it is instantaneous, it's inhomogeneous.
Yeah, it's still Y dependent.
Yeah.
So where the minus Q is some energy injection and minus P is some momentum injection into the CFT. So now in the usual Vaidya-like situation people describe, the initial state is typically taken to be the vacuum. So there you would set this L plus and L minus to 0. And the final state is, let's say, BTZ. Then you can choose the corresponding L plus L minus. So that's a subset of the solutions we described. But in what follows, I will focus on this particular subset where you have this instantaneous quench or this shock in the bulk, where M and J are of this form. But I won't specify the initial state to be the vacuum. I'll choose the initial state to be any rotating or non-rotating BTC geometry, and the final state to be some different BTC geometry. So this is a generalization of the usual vacuum to BTC transition.
Just a second, let me say that the method will generalize even to arbitrary Barniados to Barniados.
That's true.
The analysis, yeah.
So now this is really the heart of the method we use to compute entanglement entropy and QNEC. So what we have is a shock wave in the bulk at U equal to 0. You have one Barniados geometry for U less than 0, another Barniados geometry for U greater than 0. So what we do is we use two different uniformization maps. So I had described this particular map. So if the L plus and L minus are different, you'll have a different map. So on one side of the shock, we use one map. On the other side of the shock, we use another map. So what this picture shows is the full geometry in the Poincare patch. So everything to the right of this wavy red sheet is the Poincare patch to the future of the shock. Everything to the left of this blue wavy sheet is the Poincare patch to the past of the shock. So to the right of the red sheet, we have used one diffeomorphism. To the left of the blue sheet, we have used a different diffeomorphism. So the diffeomorphisms are discontinuous across these sheets. To glue these sheets together, what we do is we simply identify points on the red sheet to corresponding points on the blue sheet. How we do that is by noting that the coordinates themselves are continuous. So if you look at the metric in terms of the small coordinates, there's no discontinuity appearing in r, u, or y. So although the mass or the angular momentum are discontinuous, the coordinates themselves are continuous. So let's say I want to you want me to tell you what q1, this point q1 on the red sheet gets mapped to on the blue sheet. So I just look at the physical coordinates or the small coordinates corresponding to this point q1 in the Poincare patch, and I map this point q1 to the corresponding point on the blue sheet, which has the same small coordinates. So I just stitch it such that the small coordinates are continuous across the shock.
Yeah, but Kannan, maybe you can first show the equations for the surfaces themselves. Otherwise, it's not quite clear how you parameterize them with the physical coordinates, right?
Yeah. That's true. So yeah, as I've drawn, there are these two hypersurfaces, the red one and the blue one. So the sigma bar is the small u equal to 0 hypersurface, which is the red one. The sigma is the blue hypersurface. Now these are just parameterized by these Poincare patch coordinates, where these are determined from our diffeomorphism, where we set the small u coordinate to 0, and there is some small y and some small r. Now these are glued together by demanding that the point q1 on the red sheet has the same small coordinates as the point q1 on the blue sheet. So that's how we do the gluing. I'll come back to this figure again when I describe the lens, but yeah. So this is just how the space-time can be described using two different uniformization maps. So I've already mentioned that you use one map for u less than 0 and another for u greater than 0. But now if we want to compute entanglement entropy and q net in such geometries. Yeah. To do that, we just have to compute lengths of geodesics in the bulk corresponding to certain subregions on the boundary. So let's say you give me some subregion on the boundary. I look at the endpoints of that subregion and map it to the Poincare patch. Those endpoints are P1 and P2. So these are the endpoints of the boundary subregion in the Poincare patch. Then you can draw a geodesic which ends at P1 and P2 in the Poincare patch. And this has these two segments which I've shown, which are 1 and 3 in the Roman 1 and Roman 3. Now this geodesic will intersect with this first hypersurface sigma bar or the red surface at 2 points, Q1 and Q2. And using the gluing prescription that I've just mentioned, you can continue these points Q1 and Q2 to the other hypersurface, the blue hypersurface. And once you're on the blue hypersurface, you can again draw a Poincare geodesic with endpoints Q1 and Q2, which is labeled by this Roman 2. So that completes the geodesic in the Poincare patch. So the geodesic has this discontinuity which shifts these intersection points across this shock wave.
Yeah, I think we should also, we have cited Schenker-Stanford, right? Because Schenker-Stanford used this kind of methods to originally compute the OTOC. It's a
Yes.
highly non-trivial generation of that method, but this idea of the shift in the null coordinate was already there, but they only were talking of shift in only one of the coordinates.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the essence of how we compute entanglement entropy. So now we have these three segments, 1, 2, and 3, but they are all segments in the Poincare patch. I know the geodesic in the Poincare patch given the endpoints of the geodesic. So computing lengths in the Poincare patch is rather simple. There's a well-known formula for geodesic lengths, which is this second equation here, where xi is the so-called conformal invariant, which takes this form, where z1 is the z coordinate of one of the points in the Poincare, z2 is the z coordinate of the other point, and so on. So just given the endpoints in the
So
Poincare
here
patch.
phi should be y, right? Y1, that's what I mean.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, phi should be y, yeah.
Y1.
Yeah, so just given these endpoints in the Poincare patch, we can easily compute the lengths of these three segments. And the lengths are invariant under diffeomorphism. So we are done. We have the entanglement entropy. And by endpoints, I just mean if you have P1, Q1, P2, Q2, you know length of 1, length of 3. If you have Q1 and Q2 on the blue sheet, you know the length of 2. And that's it. You know entropy then. Similarly, the computation for QNEC is just a simple generalization. So recall that in QNEC, you just have to deform one of the endpoints of the boundary subregion along some null direction. So you can do the deformation and compute the entropy after the deformation using this very same method, and then just compute derivatives with respect to the deformation. So the method for the QNEC and the entropy are not at all different. Just the fact that you need to include the boundary null deformation. So yeah, one interesting consequence, and this is also a check of this method, if you will, is to just compute the entropy, the entanglement entropy in the case where there is no quench, where there is no shock. You just have one single rotating BTC spacetime. In that case, the entanglement entropy of a boundary subregion with length L takes this particular form, where notice that the second term is just the usual contribution from the vacuum, and this is some non-trivial contribution. Now, this was a formula or an equation that was already discovered by Grumiller and others. So you can treat this as a check on our method.
No, this was long before Daniel Grumiller's.
This was not Shaheen and Daniel?
Shaheen, no, it was much before. It is it's
I
a
thought
very
Shaheen was
old
the one
result.
Oh, okay.
No, this is very old result.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, this you can treat this as a check on our method just to convince you that the diffeomorphisms and everything are fine.
I think it may go back to Ruth Akanaki actually. I'm not sure, but I
that
forget,
old.
but
Okay.
yeah, it's that old. I know.
Okay. So there's an interesting limit some nice physics you can already see out of this equation itself. If you just take the large length limit of this equation itself, the leading divergent piece has this form, where you have the C/6 times this factor times length. But you can rewrite this in terms of the thermodynamic entropy density. So Alex was saying something? Okay, yeah. So you can rewrite this in terms of the thermodynamic entropy density times the length of the entangling region, which is what you expect for a thermal state. So for a thermal state, the entanglement entropy should be the thermodynamic entropy density times the length of the region you're
Yeah,
in.
but this is only true for a large length. It's
For
not
large
true.
regions, yeah.
Even for a thermal state, if you take a short length, it is not true. Yeah.
Indeed, yeah. So this is just a short aside to just show some nice physics which comes out already.
And this is also what to expect from the CFT also, or in any field theory, that if you take like half of the degrees of freedom, it will look thermal or something.
So yeah, that was basically our setup, this gluing prescription to compute the entanglement entropy and the QNEC. So yeah, let me then come to results. So the first set of results I'll describe is how the entanglement entropy grows after such a quench. So just to illustrate the physics, I first describe a special case, which is what is usually done and has been done before, which is a transition from the vacuum to a non-rotating BTC, which is in the dual picture is just the vacuum going to some thermal state. So the entropy versus time has this particular plot. For u less than 0, you just have the vacuum. At u equal to 0, you do the quench. the entropy starts to grow. The initial growth is quadratic in time. Then at intermediate times, you have some quasi-linear growth regime, and at some saturation time, the entropy saturates to its final thermal value. But now the saturation time is exactly turns out to be half the length of the entangling region. So for this particular plot, I had chosen a rather small length. I had chosen it to be 0.5. So you can see that the saturation happens at 0.25. So this is a generic feature which I will describe later again. Yeah, so as I said, there's an initial quadratic growth followed by some linear regime and then saturation. And this was exactly what was seen in the famous entanglement tsunami papers by Hong Liu and also the paper by Rangamani and others. So they had seen this quadratic, linear, and saturation, and that characterized it. So we reproduce old results exactly. So now, just to show you how these expressions look like, if we take the limit of large entangling lengths, the entanglement entropy has this exact form, which is the first equation here. That's how it varies in time. You can take a limit where u is small but positive. There, the small u expansion will give you a quadratic dependence with this particular coefficient, which is 4 mu squared. At intermediate times, you will see a linear growth with this particular coefficient, which is 4 mu times c by 6, which again you can identify as 2 times the thermodynamic entropy density times u. This particular expression has a very nice interpretation in terms of the tsunami, the entanglement tsunami propagating in the boundary. I'll show a nice picture in a couple of slides and describe it. Now the approach to saturation takes this particular form, where SF is the final entropy, SU is the time dependence of the entanglement entropy. At times close to L/2, at times close to the saturation time, the entropy saturates by this power, which is 3/2. Now this was results for just vacuum to a thermal state. What we can do completely analytically is generalize these results starting from an arbitrary BTZ state with rotation going to a thermal state. So there the entanglement entropy is a bit more involved, but not much. So it takes this particular form, where the second expression is the entanglement entropy for the initial state, for the initial rotating BTZ state. And this is how it changes. So here again, we can take appropriate limits and see the same qualitative features of quadratic growth, linear growth, and then saturation. There are also quantitative expressions we have for these features, which I'll come to now. So as I said, for an arbitrary BTZ going to a thermal state or going to a non-rotating BTZ, we can do things completely analytically and end up with such expressions. If we try to do this for some general cases where you go from a rotating BTZ to a different rotating BTZ, this is how our notebooks look like. This is how one of our Mathematica files would look, for example. So this is a nice cartoon I found a few days ago, which is rather appropriate to our files. But if we do some clever manipulations and simplify this appropriately, I'll show you that you end up with some very simple and nice physics. So now we are describing a generalization of these standard results from vacuum to BTZ. We generalize these for an arbitrary BTZ going to an arbitrary BTZ. So for small times, we can do an expansion and obtain an analytic result, which is this. So you again reproduce the quadratic growth with some coefficient d. And the form of d is also not too bad. It looks like this, where delta m is defined to be on the screen. Here again, you can take the larger limit and look at what this constant would go to. And it's also a rather compact form. So we generalize the earlier result from Hong Liu and others that you have an initial quadratic growth for the entanglement entropy after the quench. Now this is some rather beautiful physics. So if you look at intermediate times, So if you look at large entangling lengths, you take the limit L goes to infinity first, and then you look at large times. You'll see this linear growth emerge exactly. So this is what the entropy looks like at intermediate times. You can rewrite this in terms of the thermodynamic entropy in a rather nice form, which is the second equality. So you get that the linear growth, the coefficient of the linear growth is just 2 times the difference between the final and the initial thermodynamic entropy densities times u. Now this factor of 2 might seem rather curious or weird, but this has a nice explanation. Relating again to the entanglement tsunami picture. So you can imagine that let's say this region, this line that I've drawn on the picture is the sub-region of interest on the boundary. So you can imagine at u equal to 0, there is some wave of entanglement that is traveling from both these endpoints inward. So whenever this wavefront crosses a point, it entangles that point with everything outside that interval. So for example, these red regions have now been entangled with everything outside the sub-region of interest. So let's say you look at time u. So this red region will be of length u. This other red region is of length u. So it's exactly this region of length u that has had its entropy increased from the value SBH to the final value S bar BH. So this red region to the left will give you a change in entropy which is equal to delta SBH times the length, which is just u. So
Yeah, it requires also large time, because only for sufficiently large regions you could say the entanglement entropy will be the same as the thermodynamic entropy.
Yeah. So for one of these segments, you see that the growth or the change in the entropy is just this difference times the length, which is just u. But there are two such segments, there are two waves of entanglement. So that's why there's this factor of 2. So this again generalizes earlier results for the vacuum to non-rotating to thermal state transition. But this is for any BTZ to any BTZ with rotations or without. So this is the full general result for transitions between any BTZ geometry. So I've described the quadratic growth, the saturation. Now comes the thermalization or the equilibration. So here again we can show analytically that the thermalization time is exactly half the length of the entangling region for these transitions between arbitrary BTZ geometries, and the coefficient is also just 3/2 as before. Now what I've written down here are the final intersection points. So by intersection points I mean the points Q1 and Q2. So what will happen is that at u equal to L/2, let me annotate and show.
Hey, Tana, you also maybe have like 12-13 minutes.
Yeah.
So try to. Yeah.
Okay. So for times close to L/2, the geodesics will be like this. So where you can imagine the geodesic is tangent to this red curve and there is only one intersection point. So these Q1 and Q2 will come closer together and actually merge at t equal to L/2, such that this red hypersurface would actually be tangent to the final geodesic. And this final intersection point is what I've written down here. So there's this nice geometric picture for how saturation happens. It's just when the geodesic just grazes this hypersurface.
And the X star should be actually small y star, right? I mean, that's what you mean. The small
X star is small y star. Yeah. Yeah.
We have started.
Okay, so that was one section of results for just the entropy growth. There's another set of results which relate to QNEC. So to begin with, we can plot the QNEC, or the left hand side minus the right hand side, for some transition which takes you from, let's say, the vacuum to a non-rotating BTZ. These are the plots. The upper one is for the QNEC plus, the lower one is for QNEC minus, corresponding to the two null deformations. And these are for different sizes of the entangling region. You can see that for larger and larger entangling regions, this curve shifts lower and lower. So the L goes to infinity limit, the limit when the entangling region is a half line. That should give you the strongest bound from QNEC, because this would shift lower and
Yeah.
lower.
Can I just a comment? So the fact that one of the QNECs is blowing up is related to the 3/2 exponent of saturation of entanglement that you showed, because when you take a 2-time derivative, L/2 minus u to the power 3/2, you get minus half.
Yeah.
And it exactly blows up like a power law minus half. And
Yep. So what we can see from here is that the large length limit will provide the strongest bound on the QNEC.
so
that would-
basically, if thermalization or entanglement is like a phase transition, then QNEC is like a specific heat, essentially.
Yes, yeah. And it's a second order or something. So in what follows, we'll work with the half line, where the entangling region is half the line. So at small times, again, we can obtain exact analytic expressions, which are these two. And these are for times which are small, which are close to 0 but positive. So for u equal to 0 plus. Then we can generate this nice set of plots. So here I'm starting with a BTZ with mu plus 1 and mu minus 3/4. And this particular plot tells you which are the set of final allowed states. So for now, just focus on the gray region, ignore everything else. So the gray region is the region that is disallowed by the QNEC at just u equal to 0. These are these two expressions. So the values of the final mu's, where any of these two is negative, gives me the gray region. Right, but then there are also these dotted, there is also this dotted region, which I'll explain what it is now. So if you notice, there is no dotted region for the curve on the top. The gray region is as it is on the top. So the edge of the gray region on the top corresponds to the constraints from QNEC plus, which is this. The gray region on the bottom corresponds to constraints from QNEC minus. So if I just show you what the time evolution for a typical QNEC plus is for some set of mu's, this is what it typically looks like. So the main thing to notice here is QNEC plus is monotonic. So if it starts out at some value at u equal to 0 and it always grows and then saturates to some plateau. So for the QNEC plus, it is enough to just look at u equal to 0. So if QNEC plus is not violated at u equal to 0, it is never going to be violated because it just increases after u equal to 0. However, QNEC minus has an interesting behavior. It can have a non-monotonic behavior in some region or some parameter space. So this is again some scan over mu's, which shows QNEC minus. So you can see certain non-monotonic behavior within some critical time scale. So for QNEC minus, it is clearly not enough to look at just u equal to 0. So for instance, if you just look at the red curve, the blue curve, the QNEC minus is not violated at u equal to 0. However, at some later times, it is indeed violated because it's negative. So because of this fact, or because of this behavior of QNEC minus, we have to do a numerical scan. We can't just rely on these two analytic results to determine allowed transitions. The results from that numerical scan are this dotted region. So after scanning over this parameter space, this dotted region, including the gray region, the solid gray region, is disallowed by QNEC. So these set of final masses are disallowed by QNEC. So one interesting thing already you can see is I started off with masses mu plus 1 and mu minus 3/4. You can look at the origin of this rectangle or the left bottom corner. The left bottom corner starts at mu plus 1 and mu minus equal to 0.75. So that implies that QNEC demands that both the mu plus and mu minus must increase, which would imply that both the temperature and the thermodynamic entropy must increase, which is good. So QNEC tells you that, okay, both temperature and entropy should increase, but that's not all it tells you, because it disallows certain parts of the gray region, which would be allowed by classical thermodynamics. So already from this plot, it's obvious that QNEC is saying something much more than just classical thermodynamics. Another interesting thing is, let's say I fix my initial temperature and my initial entropy. And I also fix my final entropy, which is this red curve on this plot. So the final entropy I wish to go to is this red curve. QNEC will tell you that the final temperature you're allowed to go to is bounded between these two curves. So the final temperature is bounded between 0.475 and 0.469. So if you fix your initial temperature and entropy and fix your final entropy, QNEC tells you that the final temperature has an upper bound and a lower bound, which is something very non-trivial and something you would not expect from classical thermodynamics. There's a similar thing if you just reverse the roles. So if I fix my initial temperature and entropy and fix my final temperature, which in this case is again this red curve, QNEC will tell you that the final allowed entropy is bounded between these two curves, the blue one and the yellow one. So yeah, given this is just a summary of whatever I already said. I just put it in case people want to see the slides later on. So the main message here is it's clear that QNEC is saying something much more than just classical thermodynamics. It says that the temperature and entropy increase is necessary, but it's clearly not sufficient. So another two interesting consequences from the QNEC is that it bounds this quadratic growth of entanglement. So what I've plotted here is this coefficient which governs the quadratic growth, which is capital D, versus the length of the entangling region. The red curve is the upper bound on the D, and the blue curve is the lower bound on D. This follows
So
from
can you conclude in like 2-3 minutes?
Yeah, I have like one slide of results. Yeah. So this follows from this discussion that I mentioned here, which says that which tells you about the bounds on the entropy and the temperature. Now this was the bound on the quadratic growth. A similar bound was found by Marc Mezy and others, but theirs was a bound in a very different context.
Also, they were talking of
Initial
upper bound,
vacuum.
not a lower bound, I think.
Yeah, they don't have a lower bound. Now there is also a bound on the linear growth, but this is pretty obvious. So since I already said that the QNEC bounds the final allowed thermodynamic entropy from both above and below, it therefore also bounds this coefficient for linear growth from both above and below. So as I showed you the plots for QNEC plus, the QNEC plus plateaus to some constant value in the large length limit, and the QNEC minus just goes to 0. And this is the expression for the final plateau value. A nice interesting example of this is when you check for a transition from a vacuum to a non-rotating BTZ, where you'll see that the final value for both QNECs is 0. In fact, we can establish that for such a transition in the limit of large entangling lengths, the QNEC is instantaneously saturated. So right instantaneously after the quench, QNEC is 0. Although the thermodynamic entropy has not equilibrated, the QNEC somehow has saturated. Another observation we find is that wherever the transition is allowed, wherever QNEC is not violated, from numerical evidence, we see that both QNECs are monotonic in this allowed region. So in the white region in that region plot. So that was just the set of results. I'm at the end of my talk, so let me just conclude. So this is just a summary of what we've done. We've completely classified the set of transitions from a BTZ state to another. We've shown that QNEC places much stronger constraint than just classical thermodynamics. And we've shown how it bounds the growth of entanglement entropy, both from above and also from below. There's some promising future work which will come out soon. So one can study more non-trivial transitions. What we have described is just transitions from thermal states to other thermal states. One can study something more inhomogeneous. One can have something like a Lorentzian or a Gaussian lump of energy, and one can try to erase it via such quenches and make connections with Landauer's erasure principle, which would demand that the final temperature has some critical value if you want to erase some initial lump. Another set of ongoing work is with Marios, where we are trying to construct a quantum engine using such geometries. A simple follow-up to such a study would be to study multiple quenches now instead of just a single quench, and see how the Hull-out region changes. A nice open question, or a nice question that is of interest, is what does QNEC violation actually mean from both a quantum information perspective and also from just a field theory perspective. So from a quantum information perspective, it's related to some second variation of a relative entropy. So it would be nice to see what this plateau of QNEC or this monotonicity of the QNEC would mean in a quantum information context. Even from just a CFT perspective, it would be nice to understand what exactly goes wrong if I do a quench that violates QNEC. A QFT computation for the entanglement growth has been done, and I found a paper just half an hour before my talk by Gautam Mandal and others, where they also see this this coefficient for linear growth, but not in quenches. They see it for some thermophile double slit. So it might be possible to actually do a CFT computation. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Tanay. It was good. Good talk. So let's have some questions, if any.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the talk tonight. I was wondering, so you're talking about like the quantum null energy condition. I was just wondering if you knew about like what's the status of other energy conditions also in their quantum version? Do you have any comments on that?
No, I'm not really sure, because I thought ANEC and QNEC had somehow been related. The average thing where you integrate over the neck. And I don't know if
No, but
ANEC
what Alex
implies
is saying,
QNEC
there
or
could be,
QNEC.
in principle, other energy conditions too, which people don't know yet. Yeah, so there are some claims that if you do a similar variation like Tanay showed of the relative entropy, if you, instead of relative entropy, if you vary the sandwich Renyi divergence, then also you get some similar energy conditions. But they are not completely stated or completely explored yet or proven yet. So actually, what our work kind of tells us that to understand these variations in the first place, because like Tanay mentioned that you have this monotonicity of QNEC, why it should be monotonic. So there is some monotonicity properties of relative entropy, but these are like new kind of monotonicity properties which are holographic telling you, and these are not understood from both the quantum information perspective or field theory perspective yet. So I think that is one of the nice message of our work also in a way.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so any further question? No. Yeah, okay, so then thanks everybody for joining. Thanks to all who have stayed all the way. Thanks. So we see each other later then, and next week hope to see you back again. Goodbye.
Yeah, bye-bye.